10 of us. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time sharing my remarks. I just want to welcome you all. My name is Kylie Overson. I am very proud and honored to serve as chair of the DNC Borough Council. And I want to make sure you meet one of my vice chairs, Leon Brathwaite is over here. And our secretary, Ms. Fralick. Make sure you have a chance to see her face as well. Bree Maxwell is the Rural Coalition's director. We have a really exciting lineup of speakers and discussions for you this morning. I'm first going to welcome up my friend Teresa Purcell, who's going to talk a little bit about her work with Movement Labs and the Rural Strong Network. So welcome, Teresa.
Good afternoon. It is so exciting to be here at the DNC with the Rural Council and with a transformational opportunity to engage rural America in voting for Democrats. I am Teresa Purcell. I live in rural Washington State, and I have actually founded an organization called the Rural Strong Network. And our mission is to build a new brand. I have the visuals, but we don't get it. To build a new brand that makes it safe to put up a yard sign. It's called Rural Strong, Building Homegrown Prosperity Together. And what we do, and please join us, our website is www.ruralstrong.us. And we are really wanting to work with local people to actually understand how we actually lift up all of the democratic investments that are taking place in our communities, and actually how to hold Republicans accountable for all the harm. Doing work on who's hurting and who's helping our communities, so we can actually bring back the Democratic Party in rural America. And we're very excited to work with you all, because one of the things that we know is there's 3,144 counties in the country. 2,500 of those counties have less than 100,000 people. 48% of those counties have less than 25,000 people. Every one of those counties has a county commission, has a sheriff, has an auditor, has somebody who is making decisions about how the federal government impacts our communities and how we can actually do better for the people in our communities, how we can actually improve people's lives. Every piece of this work is about how do we make people's lives better. And that's the work we're here for as Democrats. That's the work that we want to do, and we are super excited to do it. I want to point out my partner Britt here. She is with Contest Every Race. They actually provide grants and tools and technologies to local Democratic Party organizations to actually contest every race. We don't want any Republicans running unopposed. We want to lift up the democratic values, and what we're using, and we're partnering on the communications. Rural Strong is the gateway. I'm calling it a gateway drug. Rural Strong is a wink to your neighbors when you're surrounded by Trump signs to say, hey, we're building homegrown prosperity together. Oh, it's upside down, sorry. We're building homegrown prosperity together. And then the other thing is, we actually are not afraid to say, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna show up, we're gonna shut up, and we're gonna get shit done. So that is part of what we are here to do. And the panel that we have today, the panels that we have today and the work that the Rural Council is doing is very focused on how do we connect to making people's lives better in our communities so we can all thrive. And that's what we're here to work with you to do. Thank you so much.
One more hand for Teresa. Thank you again for joining us here at Teresa and Merge, Movement Labs, Contest Every Race and Movement Labs. The work they're doing is really vital in rural communities. We're really grateful for them. And next up, I am excited to reintroduce you again to my friend and mentor and forever Senator, Heidi Heitkamp.
I'm a former senator from North Dakota. Started an organization called One Country Project, and we're partnering with the Rural Caucus here to present some programming and talk about the issues of today. And one of the big issues, people always say, the Farm Bill, the Farm Bill, the Farm Bill, the Farm Bill. Yes, the Farm Bill is important, but guess what? That's not the only thing that happens in rural America. And can I just explain to you, we got small manufacturing, but the single largest employer in rural America is healthcare. And we forget that this is all these have, that what we're going to talk about today is not just about what we should be doing for human beings and how we should be providing quality healthcare. It is an economic issue for rural America. Because when you cannot provide healthcare in rural America, guess what happens? People don't stay there. And when people don't stay in rural America, guess what happens? We do not prosper. We aren't able to offer the American dream. And so I am so excited about this panel talking about the challenges, the work that they're doing in rural America, the advocacy that they're presenting for rural American citizens in terms of health care, but also the challenges that they see. It will be my job to stay out of the way, which is always so hard for me, I know. But I want to do quick introductions. We'll start with Jocelyn Fry, this lovely woman here. She is the president of the National Partnership for Women and Families. And under her leadership, they're focusing on advancing economic justice, affordable and equitable health care, civil rights, and reproductive freedom for those who face the steepest barriers, including women of color, women of low income, women with disabilities, and transgender women. Prior to taking the helm at the National Partnership, she was a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. And let me tell you, they have done yeoman's work at CAP, presenting, I think, a different vision, economic vision for America. So she's a great person to have us here. Tammy Cromacher, did I say that right, Tammy? Yeah, she said it rhymes with soccer. I've known Tammy for years, and I thought, I only know her as Tammy. Anyway, is the owner and clinic director of the Red River Valley Clinic, formerly the only abortion providing clinic in North Dakota for over 20 years. After the fall of Roe, the clinic relocated just 5 minutes away into the great state of Minnesota, which was made possible by our now nominee for vice president and the work that was done by the Democratic Party in Minnesota to secure reproductive rights. When you do that work in a place like Fargo, North Dakota, you're constantly subjected to a lot of harassment, unnecessary harassment. Let me tell you, you get smart, you get tough, and you know how to get the job done against really adverse conditions. So, Tammy, thank you so much. Every woman in North Dakota who cares about this issue sees you as their hero. So next we have Emily Babers.
Correct.
Yeah, it's so excited. Anyway, an amazing OBGYN from Waverly, Iowa. She's affiliated with the Waverly Health Clinic, and she received her medical degree from the University of Iowa, Roy J. and Lucille A. Carver School of Medicine. I hope they paid a lot of money for me to have to say that. And has been in practice between 8 and 10 years. And I want to particularly welcome somebody who has been such a role model and such an inspiration for those of us who work in red states in politics, who, when we see what you've been able to do, Marilyn, we know that there's hope. In Alabama, never mind. Marilyn Lance is a licensed professional counselor with a business and community development background, running in a special election this past year for the seat in the Alabama House this March. She sees a clear path for growth and prosperity for her state with a focus on quality education, health care, and good jobs for hardworking families. She is ready to push back against some of the most dangerous parts of the GOP agenda, including working to repeal the forced birth law enacted by Alabama after overturning Roe v. Wade. Now, what I'm going to start out, and I'm just going to ask each one of these women, these heroes up here, healthcare heroes, to just in their own words tell us what they want you to know about the challenges that they face in their work and what they think that how important that work is and how you can help them better in that work. So let's start with you, Jocelyn.
Thank you so much, and it's so wonderful to be here. Thank you for convening us, and it's really a privilege to be in this room at this moment. You know, as the Senator said, the National Coalition for Women and Families has worked for years on a range of economic and health issues. And what I often tell people is that the Dobbs decision, the core fallacy of that decision, and the opinion that Justice Alito wrote, was somehow you could just extract abortion care from people's lives and not have any effect on their health care. And have no effect on their economic standing. And what I'm sure many of you understand is that that's simply not true. And what we have seen over the last 2.5 years is the chaos that comes from taking away just one piece of healthcare and what it means for not only people's access to reproductive healthcare, but it means in terms of their access to healthcare generally and their economic standing and just how they live their lives. And I think it's so important for folks who are focused on rural communities to prioritize this situation, because a lot of what we know and what you know is that folks in rural communities were already dealing with a deficit in terms of healthcare. They're already living in maternity healthcare deserts. You know, they're far more likely to not have access to OBGYNs at all. They already have disparities when it comes to minimum wage. Minimum wage workers and low-wage workers disproportionately earn lower wages in rural communities. When I was at CAP, we did that research to talk about that. There are people of color in rural communities. People forget about that. The rich diversity that's happening in rural communities is experiencing the chaos that has been exacerbated by Dobbs. So what I hope people will walk away from is pushing back on this narrative that somehow you can take one piece of healthcare and not have any effect on anybody's life. Because much of what I spend my time on, when I testified not too long ago before the Senate, one of the Senate oversight committees, and I talked about how you have to connect the dots, that it actually matters to people's economic standing, the fact that they can't control their own fertility in the ways that they want to. And so we'll talk in more detail about that, but that's what I spend my time focused on.
Tammy?
Thank you. So nice to be with you again. And I also want to thank Kylie for inviting me here today when I would testify in legislature. She was one of the very few, very supportive faces that I could look to and know that there was someone who had my back in North Dakota. So as Heidi said, Red River Women's Clinic was the only abortion clinic in the state of North Dakota for over 20 years. When the Dobbs decision came down, the trigger ban in our state was set into motion. We had 30 days of legal abortion remaining. We simultaneously sued the state to buy more time while moving the clinic to our new location just 5 minutes away to the beautiful Moorhead, Minnesota. In just 47 short, stressful, overwhelming, and exhausting days, we managed to move, stop, organize, and open our new clinic without missing a single day of patient care. 70% of our patients are from North Dakota, many traveling 4, 5, and 6 hours just one way to get to the clinic. These patients from largely rural areas are used to traveling for health care. What they aren't used to is worrying whether accessing that health care will put them in legal danger. We routinely hear from our patients with questions such as, is it even legal for me to come there? Do you have to report me? Or the one that broke my heart, will I be prosecuted in the future for the health care I received today? We've seen patients as far away as Texas, Nebraska. We saw our first patient from Iowa just last week after that state's 6-week ban went into effect. The legal landscape under Donald Trump's abortion bans and overturn of Roe is grim. 14 states have total abortion bans, primarily those rural states in the Midwest and the South. 4 states have banned abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy, 2 states after 12 weeks, Arizona at 15, Utah at 18, and 2 states have bans blocked by the courts. In only 26 states in the District of Columbia is abortion legal. The people we see in our waiting rooms are real people and often from rural areas where abortion is banned. People have to take time off from work, arrange childcare, take on the added expense of travel, and are struggling to cover all these costs on top of the fee for the abortion. Most of these patients either don't have insurance, are out of state, or they have a state insurance plan that doesn't cover abortion because of bans on insurance coverage. They might be on Medicaid. It would be impossible for these clinics to try and sign up for and take on the administrative burden of signing up for Medicaid in a state where a patient might come from. Or the reimbursement rate for Medicaid is so dismal that some clinics can't even afford to accept it. These are ordinary people whose birth control failed, people who don't have access to coverage for birth control, small town residents that might not have a doctor or a clinic who can prescribe it, or even near their community. People who might have all the children that they want or can handle. People who are escaping abusive partners. People who want to further their education and get ahead in life. People who are caretaking already. Abortion is a human right, it's incredibly common, and it's fundamental to rural folks having the same opportunities as those living in urban areas. Real people with ordinary lives have, want, and need abortion care. How do you think we got all these childless cat ladies? And maybe they've had an abortion or two.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Emily Babers. I'm here from Iowa, and it's a delight to be here in Chicago and lead my own small rural community. So I grew up on a 7th generation family farm just outside of Reedland, Iowa, a small town of 800 people. And I went to university and decided I wanted to go into medicine with an aim to coming back to my rural community and taking care of the women around me. It's been a great pleasure to come back and serve only 10 miles from where I grew up in Waverly, Iowa now as an obstetrician gynecologist. And it's my joy to take care of women every day, and women of all ages, and women of many different circumstances. But what I have to make sure that we walk away from this panel knowing is that rural healthcare is very complicated. And even though here in an urban area or in more densely populated areas in the United States, people may have to drive 20, 30 minutes, people may choose to go to a different clinic. In rural areas across the country, people are routinely driving an hour or more to see me, the only obstetrician gynecologist at my hospital, and one of the obstetrician gynecologists that's serving a health professional shortage area in Iowa. Now, in Iowa, 33% of our 99 counties don't have any labor and delivery service. An additional 97 out of 99 counties are technically health professional shortage areas, which I'm sure is similar to many of the other rural states across the country. And that's just a way of life in rural America. You know that you're going to have to drive and going to have to travel. But what really is the important thing about hostility in medicine and restricting people's healthcare access is that it risks all sorts of everyday healthcare situations becoming life-threatening emergencies. And that is why it is so important that our government stay out of that patient-physician relationship and allow patients to exercise their own decisions. Practicing in rural Iowa as an obstetrician gynecologist, I founded a political action committee, Iowans for Health Liberty, that helps to reinforce that relationship between physician and patient and advocate for our own patients' rights.
Thank you. It is my privilege and pleasure to be here today. And I am from Alabama. The state that seems to start all the trouble, and what happens in Alabama seems to spread to other states. But when I ran in this special, we ran on my personal story. And I think because I shared my story, I heard so many other stories. I heard stories from women I knew all my life and didn't know they had a story. I heard stories when I knocked doors and stories at the grocery store. And it wasn't just the men who were talking. it wasn't just the women we were talking, it was also the men, because this affects everybody. It's a family issue. And then when our Supreme Court came out with their hideous IVF ruling, more stories came out. And I do think stories are what change hearts and minds. And I think as we can use more storytelling in what we're doing, I think we'll be able to make some real inroads. Alabama is 50th most all of the time, and certainly we are in maternal mortality rates. The numbers are just dire, and I think, I say it often, I think Alabama, we like to cut our nose off to spite our face, and we just do that over and over again. We're one of the states that has yet to expand Medicaid. I introduced my first bill this past session, a bill to provide presumptive eligibility to pregnant women to Medicaid. That's just one piece of the puzzle, because there are so many layers to this issue in our rural communities. It's the insurance, and it's the accessibility, and it's the transportation. In Alabama, we have 67 counties, only 15 have OBGYN services. It is a very, very dire situation. Almost all of our rural hospitals have closed down. So we have a lot of work to do. I had really great bipartisan support for my bill, so I'm very hopeful when I introduce that again next session. And I'm also very concerned about all of our children and mental health issues, and I think that that's even exasperated in our rural communities because there are no providers. We've got to get good people into these communities, and there are ways that we can do that. So we have a lot of work to do, but I'm confident we can get there.
Yeah, it is so important that we focus on the workforce challenges, because when physicians in particular don't think they can bring a high quality of care because of restrictions or community norms or attitudes, they don't want to practice there. And that is a formula for failure in rural health care. I want to turn now to an issue, and we're going to start with you, Marilyn, because one of the things that surprised me about your campaign was not the impact of the IVF, but one of the most impactful ads I thought you ran was about late termination. And I think for years that's been the don't touch that, don't talk about it, and I can tell you from my own personal experience voting against a 20-week ban that had huge political ramifications. But since the fall of Roe, we're seeing now the real stories that happen when people try and dictate healthcare at that point of pregnancy. And so talk a little bit about the ad that you ran that I thought will interest a lot of the folks here, because I think they think, well, this is just about early terminations, but we are running on healthcare, and that's an important point to make.
Thank you. So I chose to share my story, and a lot of that came from watching the Diane Sawyer special On the Brink. And she profiled about 16 women and families that have been caught up in the abortion ban crisis. One of the women was a young 22-year-old named Alyssa Gonzalez. She was from Alabama. And when I heard her story, it resonated so much because it was so similar to mine. We both were expecting second sons, both very wanted pregnancies. We were overjoyed at being able to add to our family. Both of us had chromosomal abnormalities, trisomy. Hers was trisomy 18, mine was 13. We didn't find that out until about 16 weeks. And then they had to do further testing to determine, and they told me, they said, we need to find out if your baby is full mosaic or partial mosaic. I'm like, what does that mean? And in Alyssa's case, they said, we know with 94% certainty, but we can do further testing and find out, where we're really at. And she said, if there's a chance we need to take it, I want to know. So that delayed the process even further. But Alyssa, unlike me, had to travel over 500 miles to get the care that she needed in a clinic that was very overrun. She had a horrific experience simply because all of this had just happened and we weren't prepared to deal with it. But I was in my own community, with my own doctor, in my own hospital, with my support people around me. And the fact that in 20 years we've gone so far backwards, it's just obscene. So I felt that I needed to share that story, that the juxtaposition of this 20 years later, and this is where we're at. And so many people are caught in this right now, and we've got to make it stop.
And one of the things that is really important that each of us take to our own conversations is pushing back on this idea that a late term or a third trimester abortion is commonplace. These are highly desired children. For people that have been planning, that have been building a nursery, they have been stocking a closet and putting blankets and cribs. And these are heartbreaking developments. And I have wept in exam rooms with patients sharing that news. And the last thing anyone wants to do is call the governor.
You know, we recently had a patient.
Tammy, can you put your mic on?
Yes. The wonderful thing, and I was going to pivot to, it's not all grim news, so I'll share some good news in a little bit. But you know, the interesting thing in North Dakota is they had passed a law that prevented an abortion if it was the sole reason for a genetic abnormality. So we had patients who would get a terrible diagnosis, and they had to travel to Minneapolis-St. Paul, which is about a 3 to 4 hour drive, leave their community, leave their family behind, arrange for childcare, time off of work. And so, again, these politicians are passing these laws and getting in the doctor's room with things they don't understand. And so thankfully we're in Minnesota now, and patients come to us who have these fetal abnormalities. They can tell us about it. The doctors in North Dakota had to coach their patients on what to say and what not to say at the clinic. Because if they told us the only reason they were there is because of a diagnosis of trisomy, we couldn't actually provide the abortion to them. So doctors are telling patients, this is what you can say, this is what you can't say. And so now that we're in Minnesota, patients can call us and tell us about their heartbreak. We can cater their appointment and cater their visit with us to that. We can tell the other staff. We had a patient recently who she arranged for a funeral home pickup of her fetal tissue that we removed because that was very important to her. This was a very wanted pregnancy. And so when we get politicians and laws out of the doctor's offices, people can be their true, authentic selves, they can tell us their stories, and we can take care of them in the best possible way.
Now, to pivot to something that is related to rural health care and less about abortion specifically, these laws and the restrictions that have resulted from them continue to put women's lives at risk, even in situations where they are not seeking to end their pregnancy. So specifically, a number of pregnancies can be complicated by first or second trimester complications before the point of viability that can be life-threatening for women and that require abortion care to treat. This could be something like a preterm rupture of membranes or sepsis developing from this. It could be a chronic abruption where women are bleeding day after day after day, risking their own ability to regulate their blood counts and form clots in a safe manner. And these are situations that are commonly treated with the same abortion care that is provided to women who want to terminate their pregnancy. But instead, it's abortion care in an emergency. And what these laws do, laws in Iowa, laws in Idaho, laws in Florida and North Dakota, is they tie one hand behind the back of all of our healthcare providers, forcing us to fit into a box that the legislature has laid out before we can provide standard of care medicine to our patients. And again, thinking about our rural populations, how far they've traveled for healthcare, that they may have other children at home, they may have a partner, they may care for a parent in their community, they may have a farm to harvest. And we're talking about risking people's lives in an emergent situation. These are rural healthcare issues, and especially in our rural states where transport to other hospitals is so challenging, people may languish for hours or days waiting for treatment and risking their lives.
Yeah, well, I think the only thing I want to add is, you know, I mentioned at the outset I had the privilege of testifying at a Senate hearing, and the one question that Senator Kennedy actually asked me was about abortion.
Not the good one.
Not the good one. Was about abortion later in pregnancy, and he had a hypothetical that was a ridiculous hypothetical about somebody having to have an abortion at 38 weeks, something, you know, that actually just doesn't happen. But the reason I mention it is because they framed the issue around abortion access in these very extreme ways, very intentionally. The hypotheticals, if you hear from medical professionals, have no basis in reality. They also are an effort to really stigmatize mostly women who very much want these pregnancies. Many of whom, the majority of folks seeking abortion are already moms. And rather than tell a story about somebody dealing with a tragic situation in their own lives, humanizing people, treating them with dignity and respect, they want to come up with these hypotheticals that are so extreme to justify policies that really just have no place in our country. So I think we have to understand that contextually. That's why they talk about abortion later in pregnancy. It has nothing to do with medicine or what people are really going through. It is in the hopes that they will come up with a hypothetical that is so extreme that they will get people on their side to deny care at really any time when a person is pregnant. So I think it's important to put that in context. The other thing is I do want to pick up on this idea of sort of the travel, because what we know is that folks who have the lowest incomes are the folks who are most likely to have to travel the farthest to now access abortion and a lot of other related health care. That disproportionately harms folks in rural communities. It's not simply the cost of travel, it's all the costs. It's taking off a day or two from work, you know, and potentially losing a job if you don't have that type of security. It's hotel costs if you've got to stay overnight because you're going to a new state. If you look at states like Illinois, Colorado, Minnesota, what they tell you is now the burden on their health care for folks traveling from out of state. Now they have people who have longer wait times, they have more, the clinics are fuller. All of those are economic costs and have economic implications. So I think it's not solely just what's happening to the providers on the ground. It is the broader effects on the healthcare ecosystem that is both devastating for folks in the states who are experiencing these bans, but also having effects for other people across the country.
Yeah, if I can just kind of now segue to the public policy aspects. You're sitting out there, you're wondering if you come from one of these states that has decided that they are going to play doctor at the legislature. You are wondering, what can we do, and is it possible? And for years, I tell this story really quickly. When I was in the Senate, Justice Kennedy resigned, and Trump was trying to pick, former President Trump was trying to pick his replacement. And they brought me into the White House to run through a list of people that the Federalist Society had put together. You know, kind of, would you vote for this? And finally, I looked at the then president and said, I don't know those people. And you know, then he was done with me because he knew he wasn't going to go anywhere. So I got readily dismissed, and I walked out. And you know, Mark Short, who's a dear friend, and you might remember him, he was Pence's chief of staff on the day of the insurrection, and Don McGahn, who was the president's general counsel. I looked at him and I said, understand this, if your court, the court you picked, reverses Roe v. Wade, you might be a minority party for a generation. And they looked at me like I was from Mars. Like, how can that be? Because for so many years, they went to that minority of one-issue voters who became reliable Republican voters that turned the trend, particularly in rural America, when once they secured the Farm Bill, then they could turn to that issue. And they started, you know, kind of believing that the majority of people in this country somehow wanted the people to find, government to be involved in your health care in strange ways. And so we've got now, I think, one of you has a pretty good lineup of Tammy, the list of the states where a measure is on the ballot, where we will once again see things happen like it happened in Kansas, Ohio, Michigan. Talk a little bit, Tammy, to start out with, on where these are on the ballot and how you think these ballot measures will affect states like North Dakota, will affect states like Iowa.
Well, this is the part where if you know me and you know it's hard to run the only clinic in a state for 20 years, you've got to talk about the grim, but then you have to be Pollyanna. So it's not all bad news. And like Heidi said, I don't believe that Donald Trump and his conservatives on the Supreme Court and the small cabal of state legislators who are passing these laws imagined what this outcome would be. And I do have to just talk a little bit about, I was born, raised, and educated in Minnesota. I have worked with the now governor, future vice president, Governor Walz, on the Minnesota legislature. Was the first state, and it was the first bill filed, the PRO Act, to codify abortion rights in that state. His administration has been welcoming, uplifting, supporting, constantly reaching out. It is in such stark contrast to what I've experienced in North Dakota, as far as what an administration can look like when you talk to providers, when you hear those real stories, when you listen, and stop listening to the small group of people who are the loudest. It is the silent and not so silent anymore majority that is pushing forward. And so support for abortion access is at an all-time high. Voters in 6 states have already weighed in on constitutional amendments to protect abortion and have prevailed every single time. In 2024, up to 11 states may have abortion measures on their ballots, either codifying or saying that their constitution does protect abortion. Some of the states you wouldn't expect: Missouri, South Dakota, Michigan's already done it, Ohio's already done it, Colorado's already done it. Maybe you know more than I do about exactly which ones are. But it is, when you give it to the people and stop having legislators get in doctors' offices, try and understand what they don't understand. Classic example in North Dakota, when they passed their latest ban, SB 2150, they came up with a list of emergencies that they thought would be appropriate, and the physicians pulled them aside, gave them an education, and they said, oh, well, I didn't think about that. Oh, I hadn't thought about that. And so there are ballot measures happening, there's litigation happening, courts are upholding or blocking these bans, but those 6 states, can you help me, ma'am?
Well, it's Kansas, I think, was another, and
Missouri, South Dakota, Kansas.
Florida,
Florida
Arizona,
has something pending.
Ohio. Ohio already passed. They had they had the measure to try and lower or raise the level for voters, and even that failed, because they knew what that was.
So there are a number of states that have abortion on the ballot this November, but there's also a handful of states whose constitution does not allow citizens to bring forward ballot measures. And a lot of those states are going to get left behind.
Right.
Iowa is one of them.
But Indiana,
Georgia.
who else wants to complain about their state? Tennessee. People forget Tennessee's one of the reddest states in the country.
And so,
Thank you.
one thing to note is that it's wonderful that some of these states are codifying this right, but this was the whole benefit of Roe. This is the whole benefit of Roe, is that we had a federal protection for this federal right, and we did not have geographic inequality in our country. And that's why it is so important that we have a presidential candidate and a vice presidential candidate that are loudly and openly supporting access to reproductive health care.
We have just a few minutes left, and I'm going to give each one of you an opportunity to pitch an idea that the Rural Caucus could help you with in your work, and that we can do to expand your work. I wish we could, Doctor, I wish we could morph you into 400 of you and send you across the country to advocate. You know, what I think is interesting, I just have to digress just a little bit, is the number of OBGYNs who have now taken on the responsibility of advocacy for their patients. They would much rather be in the exam room treating patients than going to legislatures, than going to events like this, but they are doing it because they know more than anyone else what the consequences of these draconian measures are. So thank you so much. So I'm going to give you, we'll start with you, Jocelyn. How can we help?
You know, I think the most important thing, I would say two things. One is everybody has a story, and personal stories actually are really powerful. You know, I talk to a lot of people, including legislators, but what is most impactful is when people, particularly in their communities, tell their stories, because everybody has a story. And I think it is often the case that people have a very narrow perception of who seeks abortion. They have very narrow perceptions about women and people of color and all sorts of things. So I think humanizing the variety of circumstances that people encounter, whether it's abortion access or maternity care or whatever, is really critical. The second thing I would say, particularly for rural communities, is reinforcing that healthcare is not just one issue, right? It's a whole ecosystem, right? Like Dobbs just devastated not only abortion access, it has devastated access to healthcare, period, in many communities. And I think reinforcing that story is really critical. People with diseases, you know, that get treated by mifepristone and other sorts of, that yes, they may use them for abortion, but they use them for other things. It's absurd that people who, you know, have all sorts of conditions now may not be able to access the medicine that they need. So that's important.
Okay, quick, get the.
Okay, quick, find your local community or clinic, which is often an independent clinic. Check their web pages or socials to see what their unique needs are. Most clinics are indies, not affiliated with Planned Parenthood. It's us little indies, often serving the rural areas that provide the vast majority of abortions, and we have the least amount of resources. And lastly, talk about abortion with family and friends. Stop keeping abortion stigmatized and secretive. Woo.
So like many of our rural states, Iowa has a tremendous healthcare crisis and shortage, and we're 51st out of 51 for OBGYNs per capita. So behind, you know, a lot of these other rural states, our OBGYNs in Iowa are scarce. That's the most recent data. We might be ahead of in Idaho now, but the point stands. OBGYNs, I'm not just an obstetric care provider, I'm also a gynecologist. I'm primary care for women. And women get cancers, women need colonoscopies, they need mammography, they need their hypertension managed. I'm there to take care of a whole community, and when OBGYNs don't feel safe practicing in a state, those services lack. The other thing that's important about that is all those screening opportunities for cancers. Iowa is one of the rural states in the country that has the highest rate of increase of cancer detection. A lot of this is likely due to environmental pollutants and some of the roles of our agricultural chemicals. We need to, as a country, really prioritize rural health from the person perspective, from an environmental perspective, and from a healthcare workforce perspective. Thank you.
And I'm going to pivot just a bit because we've been talking a lot about abortion and reproductive health care, but I'm also concerned about mental health, and particularly with our children. And in the rural areas, there are not providers, and so most kids don't get any help. It's just there are too many barriers to getting them the treatment that they need. So I'm advocating for doing some work at the intersection of mental health and education. I'd like to see us bring programs into the schools that every child would be exposed to teach them how to manage their emotions and develop coping skills. So, we have a lot of work to do.
Give it up for this wonderful panel. Thank you.
my doctor recently and asked, if this happens, can you help me? And he has to tell me, no, I'm going to send you to Minnesota. We need to do better. And so I'm grateful for their leadership and grateful for the work that they're doing to care for families like mine. I'm very, very honored to introduce our next guest and his better half, the Honorable Tom Vilsack and Christy Vilsack.
You invite the Secretary of Agriculture to the rural caucus, and you would expect and anticipate that he would be allowed and able to talk about agriculture and the commitment of the administration and future administration to agriculture and to farming. I think he'd be able to talk about all the wonderful things that maybe the department has been doing under Democratic leadership. I can't. There's a thing called the Hatch Act. And it basically is the craziest law on the books. It says when I come to a place like this, in my personal capacity, maybe as a former governor of Iowa, I can talk about politics, but I can't talk about USDA. And when I go out and travel around the country talking about USDA, I can't talk about politics. But you know what's interesting about the Hatch Act? It doesn't govern spouses. How are you, buddy? Good. Good to see you, brother. So, my poor wife, Christy, has had to listen to me talk about what we're doing at USDA forever, and she knows more about it than I do, so I'm going to let her talk for a few minutes about what we're doing.
I don't know how many times growing up that I heard my dad say, as I grew up in small town Iowa, if the farmers are doing well, we're all doing well. And when Tom and I moved back to Iowa in 1975, he continued to say that. Tom practiced law and was a small town lawyer, and I was a small town school teacher. And we learned firsthand that he was absolutely right. When the farmers are doing well in rural America, we're all doing well. In 1980, the federal government, Earl Butz, I think, said farmers should plant fence row to fence row. And they did. They did it very well. And now there are about 150,000 farmers in this country who are feeding the world and fueling the world. They're making about $500,000 every year or more. But there are 1.7 million farmers who are not doing quite as well. Those are often small and mid-sized farmers. In fact, the farm income, 85% of farm income in this country goes to those 150,000 farmers, and the other 1.7 have to share the 15% that's left, which is why a lot of small and mid-sized farmers haven't been able to compete or don't feel like they're getting what other farmers are getting in an economy that now Tom would say, you know, over the last 3 or 4 years, we've had the best farm economy ever in this country, but not all farmers are feeling like that. So the bigger and the smaller farmers just are having a harder time. And as a result, we lose schools. As a teacher, that matters to me. We lose small hospitals, and our young people move away because they don't see opportunity in rural Iowa. And the Trump administration says, just get bigger, get out. That's what Sonny Perdue told people a few years ago. Well, the Biden-Harris administration doesn't feel that way. They don't think that's okay. And the people we're talking to don't think that's okay. I want to know if you know how many farms we've lost since 1980. If you talk to the governor, who's sitting next to me, of Iowa, he would say that we have lost 544,900,000 farmers, sorry. 540, yes, thank you. I told them to stop me if I'm doing it wrong. I'm an English teacher, not a math teacher. So 544,970. That's how many farmers we've lost since 1980. And as an English teacher, not a math teacher, I said, but what does that mean? Because I don't quite understand the significance of that number. And he says, well, that is the number of farmers currently farming in the following states: in Wisconsin, Minnesota, South Dakota, North Dakota, Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, Oklahoma, Colorado, and Nebraska. Sorry, forgot Nebraska. And so now, how much farmland have we lost since 1980? And that's 151 million acres. And again, I said, that's a huge number. How do you help people understand what that means? And he said, well, that's the land mass of the following states: Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Maryland, Virginia, or about half of Virginia. And so that is the whole land mass of all of those states. That's the amount of farmland we've lost since 1980. And so we have to ask ourselves, are we okay with that? As Tom and his team have been traveling around the country, explaining this to people, people have reacted to no, they're not okay with that. And the Biden-Harris administration wasn't okay with that. And so Tom and his team, because the Biden-Harris administration passed the infrastructure bill and the Inflation Reduction Act and the American Rescue Plan and relied on resources from the CCC, they were able to come up with a plan that really will help small and mid-sized farmers in the future. And I want to emphasize the fact that these are Democratic bills. These bills were passed by Democratic Congress. And so they have been working to create opportunities for small and mid-sized farmers. And you all know what the investments have been for small and mid-sized farmers and what USDA has been doing and what my husband's been out talking about for the last 3 years. Investments in conservation, investments in energy, investments in processing. So I'm not going to go into all the details of that because that would take quite a bit of time, and I want to give him a little time to speak. So the money behind the resources that they put together and the visionary plan they put together are available for 3 to 5 years, and this is not just visionary. The money is there. There are people all over the country who are already accessing these programs and accessing the resources to put them, to turn that vision into reality. And the other thing that's benefiting, not just the farmers, but the other thing that's benefiting is our environment, because these are measures that really focus on climate-smart agriculture. So, I'm hoping that all of you, when you go home this weekend or on Monday, will start reaching out to the people that you know. That when you're at coffee, when you're at church, when you're talking to your uncle who lives west of town, when you're talking to a vendor at a farmer's market, that you will start educating people about what Democrats have done, what USDA has done, what the vision is for the future, and explain to them that these resources are already available and they can access them. And one of the things that you can do when you get home is to send your friends and neighbors and the people involved in agriculture that you know to the USDA website, which is usda.gov/framework. And that everything, the whole plan and the vision for small and mid-sized farmers is laid out there. I think that it's really important that each of us in our own sphere of influence, when we leave this place, and it's been alluded to the last few days, is we have to do something. We all have groups of people, we all have spheres of influence, and we need to go home and do something. Tell them what Democrats have done, what we can continue doing in a Harris-Walz administration. So thank you for listening.
I don't know about you folks, but I feel like we've been workers in the vineyard for lo these many years to try to get the Democratic Party really focused and interested in talking about rural America. And weren't you sitting there yesterday at the convention? Governor Walz got up and they had the video, and it was about where he came from, about his values, about the importance in his life of military service and public service and family. Didn't you just, like, did your heart like swell up 15 different sizes? I think we have finally found the opportunity for those of us who have been talking about this, including Heidi Heitkamp, who's not here right now, but everybody knows how vested she's been in all of this. An important opportunity for us as Democrats to be able to go out in rural places and do a couple of things. First of all, to express our appreciation for what rural America does for us and for the entire country. What it does is it feeds us. It provides virtually all the food we need. We are a food secure nation. And as a result of that, we are a more secure nation. Other nations that rely on food from outside of their borders are less independent. Not us. We help feed the world. It provides for us the fuel for our transportation system. It is the place where most of the electricity comes from, the feedstock for the electricity that we so often take for granted. It's a place where the water we drink is impacted. It's a place where when folks in cities want to get away from it all, where do they go? They go to rural places, to the iconic landscapes of this great country that folks in rural communities help to preserve and conserve and promote. And they disproportionately send their sons and daughters into the military in order to defend this country. This is a damn important place. It's 15% of America's population, but 75% of its land mass. It's great now that as Democrats we can now talk about administrations that are investing in and improving lives in rural America. We can talk about historic investments in transportation. You know, when you're driving down the road and you're irritated because there's only one lane of traffic because there's construction going on in that other lane, don't blame me, blame Pete. Pete's putting money, the president, vice president, putting money to fix that road, to fix that bridge. And you know what? When you fix that road and that bridge, what does it mean? It means that that volunteer fire department can get to the fire quicker. That EMT folks, they can get to the person having a heart attack quicker. That's a life saved, that's a home saved. That's not just a road project. That's improving life. We talk a lot about access to health care. The administration has made an historic investment in rural health care, establishing the categorization of rural hospitals to provide more support and help, putting money into recruiting more professionals to be able to serve in those hospitals. The Department of Commerce investing in business development and new manufacturing opportunities. This is an administration that has put an historic amount of money into rural communities. In fact, a disproportionate amount. You know, if you think about it, if you look at the map, you look at where all these resources have gone. This is an administration, vice president, president with their leadership, they didn't say, just invested in places that voted for us. Just invested in a few handful of states. They said, we're the president and vice president of all of America, and you need to invest in all of America. So I think it's important for us to know that and to be able to convey that message. It's not just something, it's tell something. And we've got a lot to tell. A lot to tell. So that's the first part of my message. The second part of my message is, what a comparison. Got a little cheat sheet here that I use. Talk to friends and neighbors about the choice that we got here. Two candidates, President, Democrat, Republican. What about this choice? We got a choice for a woman who was raised in a middle-class family. Middle-class values, understood nothing was given, had to work for everything, hard work. The other guy inherited wealth. You know, they talk about being born with a silver spoon in your mouth. I am convinced that Donald Trump not only took his spoon, but his brother's spoon and everybody else's spoon. When you grow up as the vice president did in a middle-class family, you have to work hard to get to the top. College, law school, prosecutor, attorney general, senator, vice president. A very full resume showing you that she is smart enough, experienced enough, tough enough, prepared to do the job, the toughest job in the world. The other guy, he's just cheated to stay on top. She's had a life of service. He's had a life of self-service. She's prosecuted crimes. He's committed them. Right. She has an agenda that speaks to the needs of working families and middle-class families in rural America. Housing, we know it's an issue. It's an issue everywhere, an acute issue in rural America. So when you provide a down payment program, you're providing help and assistance for that young family to get started. She understands the importance of health care and preserving and protecting and bringing back protections, certainly on the reproductive health care side, as you heard from the panel. She understands the importance of helping families get a good quality start with their children, that sometimes can be difficult and financially difficult and challenging with child care and all. That's why she's proposed the child tax credit. And when she talks about tax cuts, she knows that they need to be focused on the people who need tax cuts. The working families and middle-class families. The other guy, he wants tariffs. Now, here's what you need to know about tariffs. They are actually a tax increase for ordinary families. Because when you impose tariffs, you shrink the supply of something. You limit the supply of something. And when you limit the supply of something, the price of that something goes up. Whether it's a product, a good, a service, whatever it might be. And it's been estimated that his tariff plan will cost average families in America $3,800 a year. Now contrast that to the work of the Biden-Harris administration, saving on prescription drug costs and things of that nature, driving costs down. His tax cut plan? Oh, predictably, where do you think the majority, the vast majority, most of it will go? The same place the last tax cut that he had, 83% of it went to the top 1 or 2% of taxpayers. Extraordinarily focused on higher income workers and owners. She's met the moment. You know, when our president made the historic and patriotic decision to remove himself out of this election, and Trump never, ever, ever thought that anybody would do that. He couldn't conceive of anybody doing that. But Joe Biden is motivated by love of country. And each one of us, as Democrats, should be extraordinarily proud to have him as our president. But that created a moment for the vice president. She could have stepped away from it. She could have hesitated. She could have said, oh, now what do I do? She didn't. She seized the moment. She consolidated the party. And she brought joy back into the process. She's changed the dynamic and conversation politics in this country. In a month. In a month. Holy mackerel. He's failed the moment. He was president of the United States during COVID. They want you to forget that 2020 ever happened. They keep talking about the Trump economy. Do you realize in 2020, at this time, 4 years ago, the unemployment rate was 8.5%. Millions were unemployed. Tell them that the Trump economy was so great. Businesses were shuttered. Tell those business owners how great it was in 2020. He failed at the moment. I'm just going to two more, and then I'm going to leave. She had, and he had, a very important decision maker that tells us what kind of president and what kind of decision maker they will be. She chose a cool dude to be on the ticket with our economy. A guy who could relate to anybody, anywhere in the country. The other guy, he picked a weird dude. Think about this. My first experience in Iowa, my very first experience in Iowa, I came from Pennsylvania. I fell in love with this young lady, and she brought me out to her hometown, and she told me she was taking me to the country club on the river. And so I'm a city kid. I'm thinking country club, white tablecloths, it's going to be great. Golf course, nice, beautiful meal. We pull up to this shack, kind of a sign was cattywampus that said country club on the river. It was a river in Wisconsin. Yeah. It was on stilts because the floods are. And I thought, oh man, what am I getting myself into? Anyway, it was a potluck. Oh, food to die for. It was great. And so I want you to think of, and people, all rural folks, all their potlucks, right? All this. So I want you to, you got two guests to take to a potluck. You have to choose between two guests to take to a potluck supper. Do you take Tim Paul's, is that potluck supper, or do you take J.D. Vance? I mean, really, think about that. Of course you would take Tim. And he'd have a hell of a good time, and so would you. Can you imagine J.D. Vance at one of those potlucks? I mean, seriously. So that tells you something about the decision-making process. The vice president wanted somebody who could relate to everyone, somebody who would connect and unify everyone. Trump wanted somebody that would appeal to a sliver of our population. So look, you all know the choice here, and it's up to us to communicate that. But if you want a really simple way to communicate it, good friend Tom Harkin used to say, all you need to know about politics you learn in driver's education. If you want to go back, you put it in reverse, R. If you want to go forward, you put it in D. Democrat. Got to score. There's 76 seconds left in the game, which is going to be like seconds. Everything you can do to block, to move the ball at 5 yards. Let's all on November 5th celebrate. Let's do that victory dance in the end zone. Let's score a touchdown. Let's win this race, all right?
To introduce you to a dear friend of the Borough Council, a dirt road Democrat, our chairman, Jamie Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. well, actually a few months ago, to sit down with the Secretary and chat with him about some of the accomplishments this administration had. And I know because of the hat check, he's restricted. He can't really talk about all the things that he does in his official capacity. But it just literally blew my mind. The amount of sheer investments that the Biden-Harris administration have made into rural America. In my conversations with him, he told me, you know, where some farmers were always had one track in terms of how they could make ends meet, how to produce. But because of the bipartisan infrastructure law, and because of the Inflation Reduction Act, we have helped to create new economies for many of these small farms, so that they're not just around just for the next few years, but they're around for generations to come. And that's what this administration has to do. That's what we have to do as Democrats. We have to take credit for those things. Because you sure as hell bet the Republicans are trying to take credit for the things that we have done. You know, I always wondered what would happen, whatever happened to those kids that we knew in high school. You know, you would do all your homework at night. You'd be diligent. Did all your math homework, did all your reading homework. And then you go to the algebra class. And there would always be that one kid who would whisper like, hey, did you do your homework? Do you mind if I copy yours? I always wondered whatever happened. Whatever happened to those kids? And now I know. They became Republican members of Congress. Because they always want to take credit for somebody else's work. The Democrats, we got to stop it. We got to stop giving them the opportunity to look over our shoulder and copy off our paper. And we got to call them out on it. Because we put in this work. We are rebuilding America. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris had the largest investment in this nation's infrastructure since Dwight Eisenhower. And those investments are transforming rural America. Roads, bridges, pulling out those lead pipes, bringing broadband to our communities. You all know I consider myself, I call myself a dirt road Democrat. And I'm proud to say, I should have put a trademark on it, but I was the first one to say it. And part of it is I often tell my story, that dirt road story that you've heard me say. But I grew up on a dirt road.
Carolina?
Yes, in South Carolina. I grew up, you know, my grandparents, my grandma used to pick cotton. And many of their friends had small farms. Watermelon, cantaloupe, honeydew, okra, peas. Used to sit on the front porch and shell the peas all the time. And even every now and then, you know, for a barbecue pig, I know when that phrase, chicken with his head cut off, because I've seen a chicken with his head cut off. Right? And it ain't easy to get them damn feathers off either. And so I know what it is about growing up in rural communities. I know the challenges of growing up in rural communities. I also know the joy of growing up in rural communities. And what saddens me, many of these little communities that I knew when I was growing up in South Carolina. And I started running for the U.S. Senate, going all across the state. Many of those communities were drying up, dying, because of the lack of resources, the lack of investment, the lack of infrastructure. And so that's why I was so heartened to see what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Democrats were doing in order to rebuild and revitalize those communities. You think about it, and I think COVID, it really exposed it to the rest of the world. When we are forced to live in our homes, and you can't go to the hospital. In many of our communities, these rural communities, we've seen our hospitals close over the last few years because Republicans in these states refuse to expand Medicaid. Excuse me with the mint, I'm just trying to hold on to the last little bit of my voice. I spoke to the head of our hospital association in South Carolina and I asked him, why are rural hospitals closed? He said, Jamie, for 2 reasons. He said, one, because Republicans in this state refuse to expand Medicaid, and as a result, these rural hospitals haven't gotten the resources and the fundings that they need in order to stay open. But he said the second thing is the lack of broadband. And I was intrigued by that. He said, let me tell you, he said telehealth is such an important component to healthcare right now. It is a revenue generator. And when you are in a community that does not have broadband, then you can't generate those revenues for the hospitals and the doctors that live in those communities. In South Carolina, 30% of rural communities, no access to broadband. My friends, how in the world do we expect our kids to compete with the rest of the world when they can't even connect with the rest of the world? And that is why Joe Biden and Kamala Harris is so special, because they went to our communities. They saw us, they listened to us, and they have been fighting for us ever since. And that is only going to continue in this Harris-Walz administration. Because Tim Walz also understands about the dirt roads. He represented these rural communities for a long time in Congress. He knows what they need. And he's been fighting for it as governor of the great state of Minnesota. And I've already proposed to him when I saw him and it became official. And I said, Gov, Coach, you and I need to do a rural tour. You and I get on a bus and go all across rural America so that we show up, because showing up is a big part of what we have to do. There are some communities that have not seen Democrats in generations. And it's now time for the Democratic Party to reclaim its title as the party of rural America. When I stepped down after my race for the United States Senate, I was trying to figure out, before I got the call from the president to be the chair of the TNC, I was trying to figure out what to do with this network that I've created, what to do with this infrastructure that I have. And I decided to create a PAC called Dirt Road Democrats PAC. And the first thing that we did was we invested, raised over $1 million for Reverend Warnock and John Nassau. So that we can invest in outreach to rural communities. And now I am so happy that we have passed the torch of leadership to two great Democrats who are leading the effort in terms of investing in rural America. Because they ran for governor in their states, but because of the lack of infrastructure, because of the lack of resources, they came a bit short. But I believe that both of them one day will be governors of their states. One, Chris Jones in the great state of Arkansas. And the other, Brandon Presley in Mississippi. And they're now leading my organization, Dirt Road Democrats PAC. And I am doing everything I can to make sure that they, to help them find the resources in order to compete. My friends, I just want to say this. I believe as a party, if we get our things right in terms of outreach to rural America, even if we just cut the margins by which we lose some of these communities just by about 5 or 6 or 7%. You want to talk about a blue wave? You want to talk about a major transformation of this country? That is what we have to do in rural North Carolina. We need to be right there, anchored in eastern North Carolina in those communities. In Georgia, in southwest Georgia, we need to be anchored in those rural communities.
West Virginia.
In West Virginia, yes, we need to be anchored in your communities.
Bottom up!
We have to show up in those communities. And I want to get on the bus. I love a good bus tour. I love a good bus tour. Yes. And we're going to go all over this country. We're going to go all over this country to deliver this message of hope and joy. Something we say back in where I'm coming We know suffering. Suffering may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. People in our rural communities have been suffering for a night, but joy is on the horizon with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Me and my friends are a team. We're the team Hope and Joy. And on that team, we have an MVP, our Madam Vice President Kamala Harris. And that team also has a coach, Coach Governor Tim Walz. But any good team that is going to win a championship can't just have an MVP and it can't just have a coach. You got to have some damn good role players. And that's where we all come in. We are the role players. We got to throw the elbows. We got to pull down the rebounds. We got to make the assists. We got to do all those scrappy things that Dennis Rodman used to do for the Chicago Bulls. That Steve Kerr, that three-pointer in the corner last minute. That's our job. That means we got to leave Chicago, going back home to do what Michelle Obama said, to do something. We got to knock on some more doors. We got to register a few more voters. We got to make sure that we are talking to our friends and family about the importance of going to the polls. And if they even decide that they don't want to go to the polls, you pull them into your car and you drive them to the polls. There is no option in this race. Because if you believe in protecting our rights, if you believe in protecting our freedoms, if you really want to continue to do good things for rural America, you got to have people who will actually do something for rural America. Do you actually believe Donald Trump gives a damn about rural America? No. Do you see what the Republicans are doing in the House and the Senate? Yo, they've had the majority. What one thing have they produced in the House? It took them 15 times to get a speaker, 9 months to lose one, and the current one is always waiting when Marjorie Taylor Greene is going to stab him in the back. But look at what we did with this same 5-seat majority. The American Rescue Plan, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act, and I can go on and on and on, the PACT Act. When Democrats are in charge, that D doesn't just stand for Democrats, it stands for delivery. We have delivered for America. We have delivered for America. And we will continue to do so with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz as our MVP or as our Madam President. And him as our Vice President. I want to close with this. You know, in my beautiful, beautiful state of South Carolina, which I love with all my heart, we have a motto. While I breathe, I hope. Yes, sir. While I breathe, I hope. The other party is the party of fear. Yep. They want to make you scared of everything, even scared to leave your house. But we, my friends, are the party of hope. We're the party of hope. And Democrats always win when we run campaigns that are anchored in hope. Bill Clinton, the man from Hope, Arkansas. Barack Obama, hope and change. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris had 80 million of us wanting hope. Yep. And I believe in 2024, hope and joy will win again. But the only way that we make that real is not just hope and faith alone, but it's through some work. So our motto can't just be, while I breathe, I hope. Our motto has to be, while I breathe, I vote, because that is how we make hope real. So my friends, are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready to fight? And you know when we fight, we win. God bless you all.
Say some stuff. We see the Executive Vice President from Caucus here.
So, Roderick, we want to acknowledge you. We're going to be kicking out of the room real soon. So please make sure people see Roderick Johnson.